Welcome to Success in Brief. I'm your host, Rosanne Felicello. In every episode, we spotlight successful women in the law. We discuss with them their journey to success. We talk about the difficulties and the trade-offs, along with the highlights and the benefits, and about what success means to each of them. We hope to inspire you with these stories on your own path to success. Hello, my name is Rosanne Felicello, and this is Success in Brief. I'm thrilled today to welcome my friend Blaire Bernard. Blaire is the GC at WelbeHealth. I first met Blaire in law school over 20 years ago at BU Law. Blaire and I also both started our practice at Ropes & Gray in Boston, but since then our paths have diverged somewhat, and we'll get into all of that today about the different path that Blaire has chosen and her path to success. Since 2006, Blaire has served as in-house counsel in a number of healthcare companies, where, as you know, I've been practicing mainly litigation, generally at boutiques here in New York. So I'm excited to speak to Blaire, and thank you, Blaire, for being here.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me, Rosanne. It's great to be connected again, and I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation.
Great. Let's jump right in. So what was your path to becoming an attorney?
It was a little bit of a murky one, I'll be honest. I graduated from college without a real agenda. I didn't know, really even what a career in law would look like. I was working at primarily like a lobbyist organization. I was a ghostwriter, which when you graduate from college with a degree in philosophy is pretty much the only skill you have. And my boss at the time, who was a lawyer, pulled me aside and said, have you ever thought about going to law school? And he encouraged me to think about it because even if I didn't want to be a lawyer, he thought there were paths that would open up for me from law school. And since I didn't have any other plans, I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. Turns out he knew a lot more about me and my skills than I did. And it was a great connection because I loved law school and loved going on to practice law.
Wow, that's a great story. Do you keep in touch with him today?
I used to keep in touch with him really closely. In fact, he gave me the idea for my law review paper. But over the years, it's, here and there, not as much as I would like to. So Steve Latham, if you're listening to this podcast, thank you.
That's fantastic. Did you have any attorneys in your family growing up, or was this a whole new?
No, all totally new endeavor. I think my parents kind of, maybe would have said that they saw it in me a little bit, but definitely not a path that anyone in my family had taken.
That's great. Me either. I had no one. My parents hadn't even gone to college, so it was definitely a transition, something new in our family for me to go to law school. But so we both started in big law at Ropes. Did you always know you wanted to go in-house, or was your plan to stay in big law, or how did you go about making that transition?
No, I mean, again, I kind of went to law school thinking I was just going to get an education and then go back to public policy. I really liked healthcare policy. But then I was, in my first year doing sort of well. I don't know if you remember, like the law firms would come to like the auditorium and you could like drop your resume in envelopes or something like that. I mean, so low tech. And I was talking to my dad and I was like, I don't know if I'm even going to do this summer associate thing. And he said, don't be an idiot. Like, what's the worst that could happen? It's kind of become like a motto in my life. Like, what's the worst that could happen? And he was like, see what comes of it. And P.S., you have loans to pay off. So like, might not be a bad idea to try out a law firm. And for the second time in my life, a adult knew better than I did. And I took the job as a summer associate at Ropes & Gray. And turns out it was like probably the best career decision I'd ever made, thanks to my dad.
That's great. Yeah, it was so low tech back in those days. I remember it was, remember they would post the names on the doors. If you had an interview, you had to go check out the door to see if you actually had an interview with the firm.
Totally. I mean, and kind of in a way, I'm glad. Like I I look at things now and just the amount of like networking and technology. I mean, it would have been so overwhelming back in the day. It was like all I could do to get my resume printed and handed into all those different little mailboxes where you wanted to express your interest.
Yes, this new generation is definitely much easier they have a much easier time with the tech than we do.
No, seriously.
So you were at Ropes until 2006, and it's the same year I left actually as well. And then you went to the Leahy Clinic for about 7 years. Did I get that right? The transition?
Yeah.
Okay. And so what was that job like, and how did it differ from the law firm?
Oh, it was, I mean, Leahy was really kind of, where I really learned how to be a lawyer, I think. I mean, the law firm was amazing, but, you learn tons of basic skills. I feel like I sort of associate to being like a resident in medical school. Like, it's like you go into your residency, you get exposed to a ton, you learn a lot. And then going to Leahy was like my fellowship. Like, I really learned how to be a lawyer. And I laughed because I said to a partner when I was leaving Ropes, I said, I just want to be a little closer to like the drama. Like, I feel like we don't see as much human drama. And I went in-house, and my boss, who was the general counsel of the health system at the time, within like a month or so, he said, here's your first employment claim that you need to investigate. And it was I can't remember exactly the details, not that I would reveal them, but it was like a little bit sensational. And I remember within like a week, I was like, oh my gosh, too much drama. Like, I do not need this much drama in my life. But it really was like, it was everything soup to nuts. You got to see how businesses were run. You got to see how decisions were made. And it was really, just a great way to learn how to be a business partner as a lawyer. So just a wonderful experience there. And I was able to stay in touch with Ropes and Gray, which is actually like a theme. I feel like I still work a lot with the attorneys there. And so I kind of felt like I got the best of both worlds, although I think there was a little cooling off period after I left the firm where I had to, win back some good grace because, it's always hard when you leave to go work for a client.
Yeah. I mean, I think of all the places you could leave to go, it's probably most favored if you do go to work for a client, but there's still a transition.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And the experience I got, at Leahy also really transitioned my career because I became much more of a generalist. And I think that has played out well over time.
Mm-hmm. And so you eventually left Leahy to go to NX Stage Medical. What kind of company is that, and why did you make that transition?
So that was a hard one. I don't think my boss at the time would mind me saying that I felt like I'd gotten to the top where I could get at Leahy. He was an amazing general counsel, but he wasn't going to retire anytime soon. I was, sort of unofficially like, his right-hand person. But there was no other role for me. And I said to him one day, it's sort of like when you're in a really great relationship and one person wants to get married and the other doesn't. And I was sort of like, I want to get married. And he was like, well, it's fine the way it is. Like, why do you have to mix it up? Like, you do challenging work and, you're getting a lot of, interesting projects, but I just wanted something more. So a Ropes and Gray alumni was in-house at this company that was doing, at the time, everyone was talking about vertical integration. It's this idea of like, you're the provider, you're the system, you're the payer, you're like everything. And they were doing it in the dialysis space. And I didn't know anything about dialysis, but it just seemed like a really interesting opportunity. And they were for profit and they were publicly traded, which also at the time were kind of like, it was sort of like the bad boys of healthcare. They were like out there mixing it up. And it just felt really exciting and different. And I just was in the mood. I was just in the mood for something like that. So I went in-house, and what they were doing at the time was starting up a service, like a new business line within an established business, which I didn't know at the time, but kind of became my pivot into startup healthcare. But at the time, it just felt like a great way to learn to start a new business, but with like kind of the training wheels of a larger company to help you. And I was the, not in title, but effectively the top lawyer for that new business line.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really exciting time. And we worked there for, I think we had 5 years. I can't remember now. Time flies when you're having fun. And then that company got acquired. So it was a great
Okay.
exit for the business. Yeah.
Who acquired that one?
Fresenius, which is, I think Fresenius and DaVita sort of rival each other for the top spot in kidney care and dialysis care in the country. So Fresenius bought us.
Okay. And so then after that, you moved on and you went to Iora. Is that right?
I did, yeah. So I'm a big believer in networking, and my transition to Iora was 100% the outcome of networking with some people who I had met when I was at Leahy. So my whole career path is a little bit incestuous, but when I was at Leahy, there was a business that wanted to do business with Leahy, and I was the lawyer for Leahy. And I really loved the business team at Iora. And so when I left Leahy, I had sort of, was doing my sort of baton passes to say, I'm leaving, but here's who you should work with going forward. But I kept in touch with them, and I just thought this company was doing something really cool. They were very young,
Mm-hmm.
but I just, I think I put myself on their like newsletter or whatever, and we stayed in touch. And so while I was at Next Stage, which is just how we pronounce it, Next Stage, but NX Stage,
Okay.
we just kept in touch. And then I let them know about a year or so. I said, there's probably going to be some transition. I'm likely going to look for another role. And their CFO was like, the timing could be perfect because I think we'll need a lawyer. And we just opened the conversation. So when the time was right, I transitioned and went in-house. And this was my first time of being like a general counsel at a startup, like the final, like full package deal. And I was just scared and really excited.
That sounds, it sounds like it could be very interesting. Did you have a team, or was it just you as the only attorney at the time?
Yeah, one and only. I've since cultivated a little group of other lawyers. I call us the one and onlys, where we are, the solo lawyers at company. And that's what I did. I was in charge of starting up the function. So standing up an entire legal team, and then also overseeing compliance. So those were my two charges. And I definitely was thrown into the deep end, but I had a lot of support. So it worked out well.
Did you find that you needed to sort of do any extra training or find a mentor to learn about the compliance side, where that might have not been something you had been doing before?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the compliance part, I very quickly hired a person who was a lawyer by training, but knew like the operations of compliance, because a lot of that just has to do with like, running audits and running, training programs, and it's very operational. So actually my first hire before I even, my first two moves was I hired a lawyer who had experience running a compliance program, which was lovely. So I did have to learn it, but I kind of learned it from her. And then I outsourced our paralegal function because there was just a lot of stuff related to corporate housekeeping that startup companies that are like expanding into new states, there's just so much administrative work to do. So those were some of my two early moves that kind of freed me up to pay attention to some of the meatier topics that I need to learn. Like I needed to learn areas of law that I didn't know, and some of the strategic work I needed to support. But the compliance function was new to me, and I wouldn't have been able to do it if I didn't bring on a teammate early on.
It's great to that you had the budget to do that, but also that you had the awareness that that was something that you would need to be doing. So
yeah, I mean, I had always seen compliance functions, so like I knew what it looked like. I just had never like run one. I'd never had one report to me. So it was really helpful. And actually, now I'm going to start to sound repetitive, but I kept in touch with the compliance officer from Leahy. So there was a lot of people that I probably owe favors to now, but who gave me free advice along the way. So it's sort of like I knew what the end product looked like. I wasn't quite sure how you built it. But I brought on somebody who I had confidence would be able to build it with my support and oversight.
That's great. And you were mentioning before we got on the call that Iora was then bought by One Medical.
Yeah, so that was amazing. Kind of, a little bit of a dream startup story. I worked there for 5 years. We scaled the business. We definitely had our nail biting moments, which I think is only appropriate for startups. And then our company got acquired by a larger publicly traded company called One Medical. And then soon after that combination, Amazon came in and bought the entire package. So that was an exciting time. And, I think a great way for someone like me to feel like they contributed in a meaningful way, not only to our little business, but to an industry. So I'm really proud of that accomplishment for the company. Personally, I'm proud of it, but also I'm like super excited for the team and the company for what they accomplished.
Yeah, no, it's great. And you get to see another sale of a company, and that must be a different skill set as well, and what you need to do to prepare the company to be sold.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the last year of my career at Iora was very different than the prior 4. And it's sort of, I don't know, it's sort of like preparing for the end of anything. You're excited for it. It's like exactly what you wanted. Kind of like maybe getting ready to graduate. It's like you're happy it's happening because the alternative of not graduating isn't good, but you're sad, and it's so it was a very emotional time, but obviously more happy than sad.
Yeah.
And every transition has been sort of a positive one. So I mean, because I'm in a good place now, I'm able to reflect on that experience really positively.
It's always good looking backwards, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about, or tell us about WelbeHealth and how you moved on to that new opportunity.
WellBe is an amazing company. So I'll just start a little bit with how I got here, and then I'll tell you about the company. I have had the good fortune of working with really supportive investors. And when I was getting ready to leave Iora, we still called it Iora, even though it had been acquired, in my spirit of networking, the investors were super supportive. Certain investors were, particularly interested in introducing me to their portfolio companies. So I had the good fortune of, just meeting a lot of people doing really cool things in the space that I like to operate in. So my kind of area is provider groups, like medical groups, who work in sort of disrupting a part of the industry. And usually it's through, either the way they deliver their model is very technology based, or it might be the scale at which they're doing things. It's just a bigger scale. So I would sort of say I like interested in like tech enabled medical group provider groups. So I was just meeting all these amazing companies. And when I met the people at WelbeHealth, the team just really impressed me. They're just a very mission-driven, fun-loving group of people. And it's really important to me to have fun at work. I mean, we all work so hard. That I always tell people that I interview a lot for just like that extra quality of personability. And they had it all. So WellBe is a company that takes care of people. We're a medical group, in essence, a medical group that takes care of people who are both Medicare eligible, which means you're older, like over the age of 65, and Medicaid eligible, which means you are qualify for the state Medicaid program, which is an income level eligibility. So kind of in layperson speak, we take care of like the oldest, sickest people in the country, and there's just no greater need for that. So I loved their mission, and I loved the way they go about doing the work they do. So, and the fact that we had some, overlapping investors, I knew I was going to love the support we were going to get from our investors. So it just felt like a great transition, and I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary.
Wow, congratulations. That's great.
Yeah. And I'm a one and only. So I came on board, first and only lawyer, but this time I sort of had a little bit more confidence in what I was doing because I'd done it once before.
Yeah, and you've been doing it for 5 years or so at IORA. So
yeah, can't believe it, but yeah, now it feels like at the time it felt like it would never become a comfortable place to be the one and only, and now it's kind of where I live.
Yeah. Do you do a lot of assistance from outside counsel, or is it mainly that you end up doing a lot of the work in-house?
Yeah, my CFO would probably say that I get a lot of assistance from outside counsel. But I usually hire one other lawyer, which is what I did at IORA, and I will also do that at WelbeHealth. So I like to have a lean team. I like to bring on a second lawyer, though, who can really learn the business and become just a day-to-day go-to attorney for the teams. And then because I work with companies that are national, I often do have to rely on local experts who know areas of law that are particular to their state laws. So I never, have gone the distance to bring on, for example, like an employment lawyer, because there's just going to be so many different state laws. So I generally do need to rely on my local state law firms to help me out with those questions.
It's interesting. I was reading an article today talking about, how ChatGPT might change sort of big law and how, where they make their money. And it'll be interesting to see how that flows down in terms of how smaller law firms are then affected, and actually how companies whether they need to go to attorneys for outside assistance as much, or if it'll change at all as the AI gets better.
Well, so one of the things I reflect on when we were young associates, and I don't know if this was ever an assignment you got, but in the healthcare group, we would often get asked to do 50 state surveys. Yeah, right? All right. On the other side of the equation now, as like an in-house lawyer, when one of my business partners comes to me and they're like, can you research the laws in every state? Because, we're thinking about doing this thing. Can you go figure out the laws? All I see is like dollar signs. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so expensive to figure this out. And if ChatGPT could do a 50 state survey, I would 100% rely on it. Maybe we should go invent that. Maybe that should be.
I mean, that could be a business.
Our business. The amount of times I get asked about can you go research the laws for service animals in every state we operate? I'm like, oh God, no, I can't. No, I can't.
This is tedious too, right?
But yeah, and I remember doing those projects as a young associate and not really having any understanding of how it was going to influence the business I was supporting or how much it costs to do those exercises. So I would love to have a resource that would find a way to do those quickly and cheaply.
Yeah. I'm surprised that sort of Westlaw and Lexis haven't figured that out.
I know. Well,
oh, well. I guess they don't have those.
Someday.
That'll be our business after.
Yeah, totally.
Where were we? So medical, sorry. So one thing I wanted to ask you, do you think that your perspective as a woman, as an attorney, has affected how you've made other decisions in your life, versus transitions in your career, as a woman, how that has affected your perspective at all, or whether as an attorney that's affected other decisions that you make that have nothing to do with your career in law? It's sort of two separate but related questions.
So the first one, if I understood it, is, how my personal life influences my kind of like my practice of law, some of my career
Sure.
choices. I would have said, if you'd asked me that question a couple of years ago, I would have said, like, probably not. Everyone thinks I left the law firm because I started having children, and that is not true. And it sort of like kind of rubs me the wrong way. I had children and I left the law firm, but it
Right.
wasn't because of that. And anyone who's worked in house would tell you, like, you work just as hard. So I always like to, like, debunk that myth that
Mhm.
if you're at a law firm, you can't have work-life balance. I also hate the phrase work-life balance because I feel like it pits these two things against each other, when really I think they're more just like a double helix. Like, they're just really intertwined for me.
Mhm.
Um, if you'd asked me a couple of years ago if I'd ever made career choices because of, like, influenced by my personal life, I probably would have said no. But now I will tell you honestly, as I went through looking for my next move, it was kind of post COVID. So people were, like, coming back to offices. I'd spent the time working from home with my family. Um, One Medical, I'm in Boston, and One Medical is a California-based company. So for about a year, I was working California hours,
Oh
commuting,
God.
going
Yeah.
out to California, and actually I loved it, and it
Okay.
works really well for my family. My daughters are teenagers, and so for anyone who has teenagers under the roof, you sort of know that, like, you know, they need you around, but not all the time. They don't need you to drive. And the hours work well for my lifestyle, because right around the time that my day is winding down in the afternoon, that's when they come home from sports or they're finishing up their homework. So surprisingly, I actually really leaned into companies in California during this time when I knew I could value my family time.
Mhm.
And that's probably the first time I've actually, like, acknowledged it. Like, I used to sort of be one of those working moms that was like lots of balls in the air, and I had nannies, and
Mhm.
there was, it takes a village. And finally I got to a point where I was like, you know what? Like, my kids are only under the roof for a couple more years. This California lifestyle really works well for me. The company seems willing to support it, and I'm going to put my family life into the equation
Mhm.
very proactively, and it's been great.
That's very interesting. A couple things that you said struck me, especially the double helix idea, because I find that talking to some younger people in the workforce, and hearing from, we have a fairly young associate who has said that other people that she in her class and younger, they're so concerned with work-life balance that they're leaving the office. This idea of work-life balance, they want to leave the office at 5, they want to be done with work, they want to move on. And it's very interesting because for me, I feel like one of the benefits of what we do is that we can sort of fit it in whenever. And I was just in Boston last week with my family. I had some work also, but I was able to do both because of that, because we're able to. So I'm wondering, if you have any advice for those who are, graduating law school now and thinking about their career, how to think about it in a way that, doesn't feel like it's all encompassing, but you also realize that as our profession, it's really hard to just shut the door and leave everything behind at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And, like, the way I agree with everything you just said, and the way I practice today, someone who's 20 plus years out of law school, as you've noted, is different than how I practiced, 10, 15 years ago. And I do think that the the ability to be a little bit more amorphous with my time, when I do work, has to do with the judgment we develop over time
Mm-hmm.
about, how much time a project is going to take, or what resources you might need, or, what you can prioritize and deprioritize. So I do think that it's something that everybody can achieve, but how you do it on day one, right out of law school, you know, is going to be different than how you're doing it when you've been practicing, for over 20 years, and you've got pattern recognition, and you've got, to be honest, also you've got some credibility and some, I mean, so sometimes when I talk with young people in their professions, I just sort of encourage them to be really open with whoever they're supporting. Usually these young professionals are in supporting roles, to make sure that the expectations are being managed, and it is a partnership, and that over time you'll be able to make decisions around, is this the type of project that I can put my pencil down and come back to you tomorrow? Or is this the kind of project that you burn a little midnight oil? You just have to kind of do it a little while. But I do encourage people to practice that, that sort of art of like finding the balance. But I don't like to think of it as like these two competing forces, like life and work. Like they're just not, especially if you like what you do. Like,
right.
I love my career. I don't think of it as like this negative thing that takes away from my life.
But it's just another part of your identity, right? I mean, I can't imagine not.
Right. Like I wouldn't know what my life is without my career. And it makes it sound like it's like there's like work and then there's life. And it's like, not for me. My kids would definitely tell you that's not the case.
Mine as well. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but you also mentioned that you love to network. And I was wondering if you have any good tips or, for those who might be listening about how to go about networking and how to keep your networks sort of fresh and alive and thriving.
I love to network, selfishly, it's paid off really well for me. And so I definitely subscribe to sort of like a pay it forward mentality. I would say some of, things that have worked well for me is just creating groups of people. So I sometimes try to, convene people together. I think I told you earlier, I started like an informal email group of my one and onlys. There's a group of us that are one and onlys. So I think, networking doesn't always have to be like one-on-one. And just also, I do kind of always feel like I owe back the favor. So whenever I am reaching out to someone, I try to make a point of thinking about how I can pay it back to them later on. I think people feel more inspired to help you out if they know they can count on you when they need help.
Sure.
So yeah, I think I've never really had success with artificial like mentorship relationships, where people kind of like pair you together. I think the networking is successful when it just feels natural and organic.
Right.
And so, I think, it when you see it, and just making sure you sort of cultivate those relationships over time is the best way to eventually reap some benefits of those connections.
I think that's right. I think the thing about networking is it really takes time. Building relationships takes time, and it takes real effort to build those relationships. And it's not this immediate thing. It's not an immediate quid pro quo or anything like that. And that's hard for people to accept.
Yeah. And it has to be two ways. I mean, I can think of a couple of times when people have reached out to me, and the only time they're reaching out to me is because they know they're miserable in their job and they want to leave, and they're reaching out to me to network. It's like, if that's the only time I'm ever going to hear from you, like, it doesn't inspire me to take time away from my kids or my work to go help you out. But on the flip side, for the people who, they follow my career, they help me out when I need it, I'm more than happy to reach out, on their behalf and see if I can do some networking for and with them.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's also very true. So it's important to be authentic in your networking.
Yeah, definitely.
So as you've made these decisions in your career and you've relied on your network, have you relied on specific people for advice or for career guidance? Or do you generally tend to keep your own counsel, or does it depend on the situation?
Oh no, I always am reaching out for people. I'm a big believer that asking for help is like a sign of strength. And so I will my dog just ran into my office. Is that
No,
okay?
it's okay.
Um,
Does he need you?
should I go let them out? Is this going to screw up the podcast?
Whatever, as long as the dog's comfortable, it's fine.
Okay. I always ask for help. So my father passed away a couple of years ago, but for the longest time, he was an advisor to my career. And then there's a partner at Ropes and Gray who really trained me as a young lawyer. And to this day, I would probably not make a career move without asking him his perspective. And sometimes I know what the answer is myself and I'm just looking to validate it. And other times I'm like genuinely torn up inside and I just need someone who is like a little further along the journey and has like that benefit of hindsight to encourage me to think about it a certain way or, weigh pros and cons differently. But I definitely am someone who needs a lot of, solicits a lot of opinions before making any decision.
That's great. I think that helps in making a good decision, probably.
Yeah. And I just feel like there's no downside. Like either you tell me something I didn't know, which is awesome. Like, thank you for telling me stuff I didn't know, or you tell me something I did know, in which case I'm like, well, good for me. I kind of knew that already. Like, that's good. So the only downside is it takes time, which again, back to our conversation, I think a major theme I'd say in this career path is just being patient and investing time.
Well, that's like good advice and something good to keep in mind because you're investing in yourself, right? When you take the time.
Definitely.
So what do you value most about having your law degree, do you think, having gone to law school?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say how the path could have been different, but I will say, I think it's true. I went to law school thinking I would have a different career path. And I think I could have had a different career path. I could have gone back to public policy, worked in government, or, maybe at like a think tank. And that I didn't do that doesn't make me think that wasn't a viable path. It just turned out it wasn't the path I went down. But I think that's probably the thing I find most valuable about the degree is just the versatility of it. I mean, even on the path I'm on, I've pivoted like 3 times. I was at a big law firm, then I was at a big like hospital health system, and then I pivoted into these startup companies. And I think I probably still have one more pivot left in me. I mean,
at least, right?
Yeah. So
you might be back in policy one of these days also.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe I'll go full circle. But, I think that the versatility of the degree is something that I really value. And I don't know if I would have recognized that at the time. But in hindsight, I think, I've never really felt pigeonholed.
Right.
And so I think especially as you sort of get more senior in your career and you need to make sure it's meaningful because it does compete for time. I mean, despite what I was saying about like the balance, I mean, everyone has stuff that competes for their time. I mean, it doesn't matter if you have a career that you get paid for, or you volunteer for boards, or you coach sports teams, or you take care of your old parents. Like everything is a competition for a finite amount of time. And so for me, knowing that this is a career that can change over time and stay interesting and challenging, is what makes me sort of feel good about the way I divide up my time.
I love that answer, and I agree with all of that. Before I let you go, Blaire, I have 3 final questions. They're supposed to be rapid fire. We'll see how it goes. They're not.
Okay. All right, let's do it.
Okay. So, if you couldn't be an attorney and you didn't go to law school, so what other career would you choose?
Doctor. 100%. I know. And everyone says that, it's the hardest, people say, oh, I wouldn't go into medicine. I work with the most amazing doctors. And if I could stand the smell of throw up, I would absolutely be a doctor.
I love that. What is the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you graduated law school?
The one thing I know now that I wish I knew when I graduated law school, probably that my tax professor was right and that I should pay off my loans as quickly as possible.
Did you have Feld?
No, I had Fran Miller.
Oh, okay.
Fran Miller, first of all, taxes make the world go round. She was right about that. And pay off your law school debt as quickly as possible. She was right about that. Although the second piece of advice I did not take.
I did pay off my law school debt before I left Big Law. So I did do that.
For you.
I didn't do any much else with my money, but I did do that. And third, would you recommend a career in law to women considering law school today?
Yeah, I definitely would. I think that it's a good example of a field where women can be on par with men. I don't see any reason why women in this day and age can't have very successful. I mean, I wish it was true of all industries. I'm sort of making some big generalizations, but I think that especially with the advances of technology and the way that business in general thinks about women who have other responsibilities outside of the office, I think it's a really fulfilling path. And as more women like us rise to the top, I just think it's going to become increasingly more commonplace to see female leaders in this industry. And I would definitely encourage any young woman to consider going into the field.
I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you, Blaire, so much. This has been wonderful. So good to catch up with you as usual.
Thanks for having me, Rosanne.
You've been listening to Success in Brief with your host, Rosanne Felicello. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others. You can catch prior episodes at www.felicellolaw.com and on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Twitter, and more.